I got you.
Bang. All right. Let's do it.
Yeah, right on, man.
All right. So is it Dr. Nate Chapman?
Yeah.
All right. So you flew in under the radar because Aaron Morris was telling me about it. Shout out to Aaron. And I was like, dude, I don't know who you're talking about. And it was, I think, right after you had moved here. But I around that time, I got my master's degree. So I just left tech, but a whole bunch of people moved positions, retired, left, different things right around that time, 2015, which is about when you came in?
Yeah. I graduated from Virginia Tech June 2015. I defended my dissertation. I moved here like a week after I defended my dissertation.
Wow. Nice. Yeah, Virginia Tech. What was that like?
Oh, it was cool, man. That's really where I got into the beer stuff, really. I mean, I was into beer in undergrad. I went to the College of Charleston for undergrad. I'm originally from South Carolina. So I was interested in beer, but then when I was in Blacksburg, Virginia Tech, the beer scene was kind of getting going there, and craft breweries were popping up more and more in Virginia, and just the scene in general was starting to really kind of pop and getting some national attention. And I mean, we went from like just over 2,000 breweries or something to now over 8,000 in about a 10-year period. Yeah. So this was like right at the beginning of that, you know. So I was working at a couple different bars that were trying to get better craft beer selections, and I had some experience because I've been drinking it for years and was starting to dabble in online beer trading and beer forums and that kind of stuff. So, which is how we got these beers we're drinking today, by the way, some online beer trading.
Yeah.
So, and then, you know, kind of, as you know, getting a master's degree, you got to pick a topic eventually to do something on, a dissertation or master's thesis. So I was studying sociology of culture and cultural studies. So I just thought, you know, there's nothing really out there about beer. It's something I'm into. Maybe I can be the person to start that conversation. So that's kind of where it began, I guess.
Yeah. Man, that is one thing I love. And I feel like it's drilled in at a lot of colleges, but they were like, oh, cool. Write your master's thesis about something that nobody's ever done before, please.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, man, okay. Well, fortunately for me, martial arts, most martial arts historians are practitioners with terrible biases. There's only a handful of people that are historians that write about martial arts.
Right.
So it was a pretty narrow field for me to get into. So that's...
Yeah, but I think that's like a really good opportunity, though, too, man, to when you see a niche that you have, you know, some experience, and particularly anecdotal and firsthand experience and a personal life experience, you can, if you're able to eliminate those implicit biases, you know, then you can really add something. But I think, too, it's a good exercise to, like, be critical and look at the things that you enjoy. I mean, some of my other research revolves around music scenes. You know, you're in Panic, I'm into Fish. So that whole scene, you know, like, but sort of deconstructing that and looking at, you know, the racial dynamics and gender dynamics in those scenes and things like that too. So, you know, you being close to a scene is one thing, or some phenomenon, right? But having like training and methodology and theory and being a social scientist or a historian, you're able to like look past that a bit. So,
man, that is I'm sure Fish is the same way. I've never got too deep into Fish. Like, honestly, I have liked everything I've listened to by Trey Anastasio. Like, really, there's been tons of times where I've been like jamming something come on like Spotify or something afterwards. I'm like, this is sick, and it's Fish. I've just never got into him for whatever reason. And I didn't get into Panic till 2015, but the history of Panic is insane. And I assume the history of Fish is too, as long as they've been doing it.
That'll be volume 2 of the podcast, man.
Yeah, hell yeah. Yeah, we could do. You know, I have a huge record player at the house, but I'm going to get another one, set it somewhere over here, and just listen to vinyls while we bullshit.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Like, audience won't be able to hear them. We can hear them, but we can still talk to each other. So that's
But you can use it for like cut music too.
Yeah.
Like, you know, right here, because you'll cut this part out. You could have a little transition with music and stuff. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that'd be dope, dude. Man, I need to hook you up with my buddy Slade too, who did those mixes for you.
Oh yeah.
He's the man with like doing, like, putting stuff together, like exactly what you're talking about, like how to hook up the audio and stuff, man. But you know, he loves to like work on that kind of shit. So nice. Man, I put you in touch with him sometime.
For sure. I would love that. Maybe he wants to come on the podcast, or I just talk to him. Right. Like,
yeah,
I'm open to talking.
He doesn't live here, but we could do a Zoom.
Yeah.
I'll mention it to him, man, because he just likes to talk gear, man. You know, like we could Zoom from here and show him your setup and
Yeah.
stuff, man, and he'd just like to check it out.
Man, I do. Like, I want to create like a Joe Rogan did this. He has a blog that they've continually updated. It's a blog page article about just his studio. They've updated it since he changed everything, moved to the new studio. Like all the gear, links to get it on Amazon. I kind of did that with like a YouTube playlist for like a bunch of different pieces
Yeah.
of gear, like my board and my handheld recorder, some of the stuff I have in here. But I think that'd be super awesome to do like a podcasting 101, like
Yeah.
overview the studio,
For sure.
link the video and the blog. Because I've got a blog now, I just haven't posted it.
Dude, not only that, man, but like all the stuff I watched on YouTube when I was trying to make my own videos, the videos are the good ones stand out because there's just a bunch of shit, you know. Anyway, what was I talking about?
Well, we got off on gear, your buddy Slade.
Oh yeah, so but back to the beer stuff. So yeah, I guess when I was in Blacksburg though, working at a craft beer bar, I started meeting brewers, I started meeting other bartenders, I started meeting distributors and reps. So you know the marketing people that come in and like if you go to a bar or a gas station or grocery store, you see the neon lights or the posters and the ads.
Yeah.
Those are put there by wholesale distributors, right? So they control the marketing of beer in a particular area. And so each wholesale distributing company, like for example, in Virginia, we had Blue Ridge Beverage, okay? So in their portfolio, they might have Anheuser-Busch, but then they wouldn't have Miller or Coors, right? But then they might have Sierra Nevada, but they might not have Sam Adams. And then they might have some smaller microbrews, but not others. So it's an attempt to like prevent monopolization, right? It's called a 3-tier distribution system, which I can talk about more if you want. But
Yeah, that is interesting.
that's more like the weeds and the history of it. So if you want the more historical side.
Well, here's a question, just thinking about this. Like, at any point, does this tie into, you know, because I'll tell you where, like, you mentioned Panic scene having a rowdy fan base.
Yeah.
True, very true.
Very true.
They broke record beer sales at least 2 venues I was at. Right,
Oh, yeah.
like where does this story cross over into into the music scene, basically?
Well, I think we offer up what we do in the book is certainly try to put some historical context into the way that what we would refer to the Panic scene, the fish scene, craft beer scene is a white space. So
okay.
how white spaces form, like the formation of a white space, and how they function in terms of reproducing and perpetuating inequality and discrimination, but also how they are steeped in stereotypes and often discourage minorities from consuming particular goods. So think about like how many black people do you see at a Widespread Panic show? How many black people do you see at a fish show? How many black people do you see at a craft brewery, right? So those basic questions, though, and those like simple observations were kind of what led us to getting into the book. Like I was doing a lot of research on craft beer at the time about gender and gender dynamics, and just being the sociologist, I was like, well, okay, if we're going to consider gender, we also need to consider, race and social class and other aspects too, right? And take a more intersectional approach. So we just started with that simple question after reading this article, the title of the article, and I've actually connected with the guy's name is Dave Infante, and he writes for like Thrillist, Draft Mag, Punch, some of these like bigger, beverage and kind of culture online journals and newsletters and stuff. But the title of the paper was "Black People Don't Drink Craft Beer. Why?" Something to that effect. And so we kind of just started there. But like when you have a question, why don't black people go to Widespread Panic, or why don't black people go to Fish? Why don't black people like craft beer? It's never that simple, right? So we do the book, had to look historically at like the formation of the beer industry, and what all that involved, the systemic racism in hiring practices and discrimination in hiring practices, post-prohibition, but even pre-prohibition, the treatment of immigrants and certainly the treatment of slaves and African Americans for hundreds of years, right, leading up to all that, right? And that's just one part. But then post-prohibition, when we see like the actual, sort of consolidation of the beverage industry, how those structures became, more galvanized and concretized, and really set up boundaries to keep people out, right? So just one example would be if, when we had mentioned the book, some people had posted comments, like, well, if black people want to brew beer, why don't they just go work at a brewery, right? Well, in the 1940s, 1950s, in the Jim Crow era, it's pretty hard for a black man, certainly a black woman, to go and just get a job. But also what a lot of people don't know is these things were tied to union houses, right? Unions, labor unions. So the way to get into a labor union, you have to be referred by someone. You have to know someone. You can't just go apply and get in, right? Hence the Holy Brotherhood aspect of it, like a fraternal order of, welders, whatever, right? So then you have them limiting access and gatekeeping to keep minorities out of these labor unions. And then when you have breweries that are forced to hire, or air quotes, forced to hire labor union workers, well, then you can't get minorities into that industry, right? And that's just one like small aspect of it, because
and two, so I'm sure you're familiar, at least in passing, with the Elaine massacre here in Arkansas. It's like labor union meeting.
Yeah.
So that's interesting about how. So what you're saying, so African Americans in Jim Crow Arkansas, for example, while they don't cut white people's hair, they did cut like that barber did do well, right? But he was only cutting white people's hair. So what you're saying is maybe like while we see people become barbers and things like that, that this is more of a niche where you just don't see white people starting their own brewery at all.
Well, so we do actually know about a few brewers, black brewers. Theodore Mack is one, in the People's Brewing Company. He is widely regarded as like the first independent black brewer to own his own brewery and everything. His story has been a little bit like, it's not been lost, it's out there, but people have just glossed over it.
Is he still alive?
No. But Garrett Oliver with Brooklyn Brewing Company, you've probably seen Brooklyn Beer around. It's a really good brewery. They've been in the game for, I don't know, going on almost 40 years, late 80s, early 90s. But Garrett Oliver was their brewmaster. He's the first black brewmaster in the U.S., and he's won international and national awards. I mean, he's widely regarded as one of the best brewers in the world, But that's two people, So what it does really, to sort of answer your question, is it's not as simple as just, going out and like starting a brewery, right? Because that's what we were trying to figure out, is like, how would one drink craft beer first, right? But before we could answer the question of why don't black people drink craft beer, they said, well, then how do people who are in the majority, white people, white males that look like me and you, beards and mustaches, right, that listen to jam bands, that are drinking beer, how do we get into it, right? So if you look at the demographics and of who the craft beer drinker is, we know that they're generally, and when I say craft beer drinker, this is someone who like self-reports drinking craft beer 2-3 times a week on average, something like that, or will go to breweries, whatnot, right? So they're usually between the ages of 25 to 40. They're usually college educated, low middle income, right? They're not working class, right? And they live in, more suburban type areas, but rural areas that are developing. And you hear the word revitalization a lot, gentrifying areas, which is something else we looked at. So you ask yourself, how did these people get into beer, right? Well, we know craft beer is more expensive. Okay, so we can say already there's a class element. But there's this other idea about cultural taste, right? And how you develop a taste for beer. Because, my dad drinks beer, but like, what's your dad's favorite beer? If you go to your dad's fridge, what's in there?
Dude, my dad doesn't even drink beer.
Oh, really?
It's crazy. But my Uncle Mike, Coors Light.
Yeah. And
that's what I grew up on, dude.
And Uncle Mike will never drink anything but Coors Light, right?
As far as I know, that's what he's still doing.
Right.
And it was like my whole life. I saw somebody had a silver can, like a Shasta, in one of my classes the other day. I swore it was it was like a Diet Shasta. I don't know why they were drinking that. But I was like, dude, you drinking a Coors Light? Like, it looked like a silver Coors Light.
Yeah, man. That was the first beer I ever had, because that's what my dad drank too.
Yeah, that's classic.
But so for that generation grew up in 50s, 60s, 70s, baby boomers, and then Gen X. To them, like, beer was just this thing, this like catch-all term, like it was like ubiquitous. That's everything's just beer. Like there was no distinctions between all these different kinds of beer. So if you said, I'm gonna go get us a couple beers, Well, if you're at Uncle Mike's house, you already knew what that was going to be. And anything that wasn't a Coors Light to Uncle Mike looks like either not as good or is different, right? So that's a process that we call distinction, right? Pierre Bourdieu, so the more cultural sociology, cultural studies, how we make distinctions between products. Like we're about to drink a different beer here. That the first one we're having is a hazy American Pale Ale from.
It was tasty, man.
It was really good, right? Pretty fresh too. Brewed in by Parish Brewing Company, and I think it's Lafayette. But actually, yeah, or Broussard. You know, Dr. Thibodeau, Jordan Thibodeau, psychologist.
No, I don't. Actually.
He's a good friend of mine. But his parents live like 2 blocks from the brewery.
Oh, nice.
And they're like world renowned, you know, like up and coming brewery. And so they just go pick us up beers and send them to us. It's awesome.
Yeah.
But, yeah, so, you know, that was a pale ale and we're about to drink a stout, you know, so 2 totally different styles, right? So that's a stark example. But like, let's say I put Coors Light, Bud Light, Miller Light, and then a few other light beers, Michelob Light. If you can ever actually find Michelob Light, by the way, it's actually pretty good. Dude.
I've had my fair share of those too.
Yeah, I don't like Ultra, but Michelob Light, man. Michelob Light, Miller High Life, and Southpaw Light are like my secret. Like I don't tell anybody those beers I drink, but if I see a 6er of bottles, only bottles, you know, I'll go for it.
What do you think about just Bud Heavies?
Oh, all day, bro.
Yeah,
all day. If I'm like at the golf course or whatever, I know they've got Bud Light, but I just like to mess with people like, yeah, 6-pack of Budweiser, and they're like, yeah, and I'm like, yeah, Budweiser, dude. It's I actually enjoy Budweiser and PBR, but those are like the only 2 like domestic beers that I like the I guess the heavy form of. I had a PBR Light one time in New York City. It was the first time I'd ever seen it. It's a light blue ribbon instead of the red ribbon. Yeah. Man, it was trash, dude. It was terrible. And then Coors Original is terrible. But
I don't even think I've ever had a Coors Original.
But Coors Light's tolerable. It's just like Miller Genuine Draft is terrible. Miller Light's terrible. High Life is that sweet spot. Literally. Yeah. I mean, it tastes like sugar. But yeah, did you see, you know, you drink these beers that like, you just have like memories attached to them, you know, like when we were in college, man, in our fraternity, we would get $45 kegs, right? We would go find a keg shell somewhere, somebody had one, because that was like a $50 deposit. Mm-hmm. So oftentimes, you know, we just took them when we saw them in someone's yard or whatever, but hey, man, lock that stuff up. We used to chain ours up, man. You know, we'll hear you if you're coming to get them. That was money, you know, but then you'd get a keg for $45, like a half barrel keg, you know, 160 beers of 6% malt liquor. Rocking good time, man.
Yeah.
But yeah, anyway, so my point though is like what we looked at in the book is like, well, if, you know, blacks and other minorities in these, you know, marginalized communities are only exposed to like malt liquor, for example, if they're only marketed, that's where the role of the distributor comes in, right? Because they have an advertising budget that they choose to spend in certain places and which products to. And, you know, in some of our interviews, we found some of these, you know, carried pretty hard stereotypes, you know, like why would I sell to craft beer in a black neighborhood? They can't afford it. That kind of thing.
Oh, man,
right?
yeah.
Yeah, and you think if that's industry-wide, and we also, you know, looking at the makeup of the wholesale distributor industry it's just all white males, man.
Was there ever any signaling of not just they can't afford it, but, well, you know, this will make them... Like, I feel like there were some stereotypes with Native Americans in drinking alcohol with like...
Well, so part of that is, man, just to be honest, is, you know, you got to think, you got to ask yourself why these people are drinking what they're drinking. Mm-hmm. And then what the perception is of them drinking from our perspective, you know, and what's the power relationship there, right? Because the Native Americans example, or the original peoples and indigenous peoples, you know, like the notion of like, quote, firewater and things like that is really problematic, right, man? Because that was something that we introduced to them, you know, in a much bigger way, right? And so then when you displace a people, and this is similar to the gentrification process, but on a much, much larger scale, right? Mm-hmm. We're talking about genocide effectively, right? You know, you strip them of their their land, their property, and the meanings attached to that to literally displace them, you know, what do you do? You know, I mean, it's to see the alcoholism rates, the suicide rates, also the, you know, sexual assault and unreported, you know, like missing women. I don't know if you've
on reservations.
Yeah, you know,
stuff
like that is because they're so, you know, they're not out of touch, meaning they're not connected to the world, but society doesn't care about them, right? So it's a difficult position, man. You know, but I think too, when you look at that, there is an argument to be made, particularly like with malt liquor. Just by definition, industry definition, malt liquor is an inferior product to beer. It's considered a lower tier product. It has higher alcohol content. So essentially what they do to make malt liquor is they take the beer that they wouldn't, you know, didn't turn out as well as they wanted it to for some reason, or was going to be a lower alcohol content. It's kind of like leftovers, the dregs or something, you know what I mean? In a way.
Like a hot dog of beers.
Yeah, kind of, man. And so what they do then is they jack up the alcohol content by putting a bunch of sugar in there, and the yeast eat that sugar and make alcohol. So one, it makes it sweet, but two, it makes it very high alcohol content. So, you know, malt liquor is closer to like 6.2 to 7.2 range, right? A Budweiser, which is on the higher end, is like 5.2 or 5.3. A Bud Light is 4.2, I think. A Mick Ultra is like a 3.4 ABV, right? So you can see quickly that it's becomes a quick like increase in the ABV by volume, right? But also think about how malt liquor was sold, right? Malt liquor was sold in 40-ounce bottles that at the time were not resealable, were behind the counter in a cooler, so a convenience impulse buy location in a store, right? Also, you know, there's the fear that, you know, any black person that comes into your convenience store is going to rob you, so you have to keep the things that they want behind the counter, right? So there's some of that going on as well. You know, again, the stereotypical stuff, right? But then when you open that thing and it's hot outside and that thing's cold and it's a brown paper sack between your hand and that, and you got 40 ounces of it, I mean, you know, these two beers right here are not even, this isn't even 30 ounces combined, right? So 10 more to that to yourself, like, that's a lot, man.
Dude,
but it encourages that immediate and total consumption, you know?
Yeah, no, with 40s. 40s are great. I used to periodically grab a 40 if I was like a passenger, like I knew I was going to be on like a 2 or 3 hour trip or something.
Oh, yeah.
I would just kill a 40 at the gas station. And
totally.
It's like, all right, this is good.
Yeah, totally. There were some Mad Dogs and stuff. Yeah, I mean, and then you also see though, like, and you're probably aware, but like the, you know, late 90s, early 2000s, you know, white college kids playing like Edward 40 Hands and all this kind of stuff. And so there's like some co-opting and appropriating of the 40 as well and turning it into like a white college frat boy thing, right? And to do that, like, you know, is problematic in a couple of ways, right? Because one, you're co-opting this thing that you think means something because you've heard it in some rap lyrics and stuff, but really, like, malt liquor is more of like a cultural thing in that community, right? In that time, right? The late 80s, the late 70s up to the 90s.
The first time I ever heard about Hennessy was in a Tupac song.
Yeah,
100%.
I mean, most white people I know did not know what Courvoisier was, Hennessy, or any kind of cognacs, or Alizé, or any of that stuff. Hypnotic, none of that. Thug Passion, you know, from listening to hip hop. And so, what do they do though? You know, you hear about it, and then you want to go and you want to see because you think Tupac's cool. You think, right? And on the surface, right, there's nothing wrong with that, right? But at the end of the day, it's like we have to understand. You know, well, why is it that maybe black people drink hard liquor more than, you know, beer or other alcohol? Well, if in the 1960s when people are going out to bars and the craft beer movement's getting ready to start and all this, you're not allowed to go to the same spaces as white people.
Dude,
and you can't afford appliances like a refrigerator to keep a six-pack cold. what do? You're making your own booze or you're getting hard liquor, right? So it's not as simple as like boiling it down to or reducing it down to a choice that a consumer makes, right? And it never is. So I think what's interesting is to look at something that's seemingly, innocuous, like what beer do you want to drink? And then looking back and seeing, well, what actually informs that choice, and is this affecting an entire category of people, demographic category of people, So it got heavy really quick, man, when we started.
Yeah, man, you're blowing my mind right now. I mean, quite honestly, I never would have thought about any of this, but this is like right up my alley at the same time. I'm like,
yeah, man.
But dude, I've had bootleggers in my family, right? Like back pre-60s and stuff, and then I'm pretty sure that same Uncle Mike has it still, but I'm not. I don't know if it's still running, but but did you see any of that? Like you mentioned, like they're either going to make their own beer or like, do you see any bootlegging? And
so I mentioned the industry, like getting in there and learning how to brew or working at a brewery. I mean, even like working a forklift and lifting kegs, like we kind of focus on three things in the book, and sort of how it became white, why it matters, and the movements to change it. So the how it became white part is really showing how that three-tier distribution system limits access to jobs and exposure, but that two, there's no representation in the industry at the wholesale level, the marketing level, or the tap room bar level, right? Like, and then that leads to there's no consumers on that side, right? So what we kind of focused on, I guess I wouldn't say uncovering, because I think it's been in plain sight. I just don't think people have wanted to see it, right? Because it's not comfortable to talk about race, right? But it's not as simple as like being a home brewer. We looked at, when I was asking people like, well, how did you get into beer? Like, how did you start drinking craft beer? Well, so-and-so, I started home brewing because I didn't like regular beer. Or my dad worked at a brewery. Or I was in college and I started trying beer. Or I worked at a bar, okay? So just those four things right there, all right? If we were to look at how those things are racialized and are certainly laden with privilege and entangled with the systemic racist structure of, well, U.S. society, right? Writ large. So the brewery thing we kind of covered, right? But now the home brewing thing. Well, one, why would one get into home brewing unless one had other beer and wanted to try other beer?
That's a great point.
Right? So let's say that you were in a position where you did try craft beer or different beer. At the time, it would have been imported beer. Like the homebrew thing sort of started in the mid to late 60s, and it's much bigger now, the national organizations, all that, but it really gave momentum to like the whole craft beer thing, movement, whatever you want to call it. I don't like to call it a revolution. I think it's more just a wave of production really than a movement. But anyway, that's another topic. But if you wanted to get into homebrewing, let's just say you heard about it. Well, how would you do it? Well, back then it was illegal to homebrew. So people were having classes at, like UCLA, Berkeley was one example, where the Maltose Falcons were founded, which is the oldest on record homebrew club, and they're still in operation today. They've been homebrewing for like 50 years together, world renowned. So, you got to know somebody, right? But these are like chemistry professors during the day that know fermentation sciences, that are going home and they're brewing beer themselves and they're teaching other people, right?
Wow.
So this is getting spread word of mouth. Then there's like newsletters and fan clubs and, little organizations start to pop up. But, this is pre-internet, man. This is it's still like to call long distance at that point, you would have had to like get dialed in, to someone, So like information didn't travel fast. So what that means though, sociologically, is that a small network of people is even more insulated and isolated, right? Now, if I want to get access to home brewing and things like that, and I think this is part of the reason why people, sort of like, well, if black people want to drink beer, they could just go do it. It's everywhere, right? Well, okay, yeah, so all the information about home brewing is there, but where's my interest? Where's my motivation to do so? Whenever I see a brewery and everybody in there's white, when I don't see any white people, or invite, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's representation, it's access, and then it's, this conversation about like reaching out to the community, like the movements to change it part, like working with social media influencers. I mean, hip hop artists have collaborated with breweries. One of our respondents, they took craft beer to barbershops in downtown Atlanta and just opened up 6-packs, like, and just taking beer to people. So what we argue and say, like, I guess the way to move it forward is the industry has to take notice of that, and they need to be the ones doing that. Go hand out free beer. Go let people try it. Because, there's so many levels here. There's the industry level, and then the sort of marketing, organizational level with breweries and things like that. But then there's that consumer level, the individual level, like, and you can do work at all three phases.
Well, and that seems like if this is the case, then there's just in capitalist terms, there's a demographic gold mine out there, right?
Well, that's the other thing. I mean, it's like you could look at it strictly through capitalist lens and say, I mean, no pun intended, but there's a huge untapped market. I mean, right now, the amount of craft beer produced in the U.S. Makes up consumed, not produced, is, I want to say it's like 14 to 17%. I can't remember from last year's figures to this year. Of all beer consumed is craft beer, okay? So to put that in perspective, then maybe 6 to 7% is considered imported. Mm-hmm. But by now, like Coronas and Heinekens and things like that aren't imported anymore. They're made here, right? Because we don't have to wait anymore,
Yeah.
So that means the rest of it is domestic beer. And domestic beer is light beer. So to put this in perspective, the largest craft brewery in the country, I believe currently, is Sam Adams. So Sam Adams and Sierra Nevada sort of swap off. Mm-hmm. One reason why, though, is Sam Adams makes cider, and cider is recognized because it's a fermentable product as beer and categorized in that instead, because it's not wine. So they got a boost in their production. They produce annually just under 7 million barrels of beer. Okay, 1 barrel of beer is 2 standard kegs. Okay, so like you go to a bar and you see, or keg party, that's that 2.5 foot tall silver keg. That's a standard keg. That's a 15.5 gallon keg, a half barrel. All right, so 15.5 gallons of beer in 1 keg, 2 kegs per barrel. So 7 million times 2 is 14 million kegs of craft beer, right? Wow. Let's just say Sam Adams only made Boston Lager that year. They made 14 million kegs of Sam Adams. That's a lot, right? I mean, think about what 14 million kegs looks like, right? So get ready for this. Anheuser-Busch, that same year, okay? I think this was 2018 when I was writing about this. This is just Bud Light, okay? This isn't Budweiser, Bud Ice, any of the other like specialty crap they do. This is just Bud Light, which is the #1 selling beer in the world. Just take a guess. Sam Adams, 7 million. How many?
30 million.
30 million?
Yeah.
Not even close.
70 million.
Still not even close.
114 million.
270 million.
Damn, dude. I wasn't going to go that high. No way.
270 million barrels. So 540 million kegs of just Bud Light. Now, some of that goes to cans, some goes to bottles, but the keg is the easier to figure, right? If you want to divide it into cans, you're talking, there's almost 150 or 160 cans per keg. So, you can see it gets really crazy fast, but that's just Bud Light. But you got to think, man, they've got breweries all over the world. Multiple breweries just in the U.S. Mm-hmm. Here's a bit of irony, too, because, one of the things in beer, particularly with craft beer, is the freshness. So, like, all these beers have dates stamped on the bottom, so when when it was canned, because it's alive, right? And some beers you can age if you want to, but beers like pale ales and stuff like that with hops, drink them fresh because they're not going to taste good. That's when they get bitter and skunky, right? So I had some friends who were in St. Louis, the home of Anheuser-Busch, St. Louis, Missouri, right? Went and got Bud Lights at a baseball game, looked on the bottom, and they had the date stamp, and it gave the location code, and it was from their brewery. I can't remember which one it was, but it was their East Coast brewery. So they're in St. Louis, the home of Anheuser-Busch, and that beer still came halfway across the country from their East Coast facility to that baseball
That's
game.
interesting.
Right? So you see the scale that we're talking about, right? But whereas like Sam Adams, it gets complicated, like contract brewing, where like, let's say you owned a brewery, a big brewery, and I'm a startup. I could be like, hey, Brian, I'm going to send you my recipes and I'll pay for the canning and I'll help pay your labor and you can get a cut, but I'm going to need you, because I'm trying to expand, I need to use your brew space. So I'm contracting you to brew this beer for me under my name. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So you're basically like, well, it's contracting. Yeah, you know, I'm contracting you out to do this for me, but I'm getting the end of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it gets really complex, man. And one other amazing thing about doing like research in that is just how little the average drinker knows about the alcohol industry, man.
Yeah, This is very interesting. Are you planning more follow-ups to this topic?
So that's an interesting question, man. I guess I go back to like when I started this. You know, I didn't see anybody writing about beer the way I was thinking about it. You know, sociologically or even analytically whatsoever, right? Everybody would just want to tell the history of beer, the history of this brewer. No one wanted to like dig in, right? So when I set out with my first book, the edited volume, Untapped, I was like, you know, I have a chance to create a discourse here, right? To start a discourse, I should say. And through that, I started writing down other questions as I would write different articles. I'm like, okay, I'm going to go explore this now or this now or this now. And eventually when I started doing the gender stuff, that led me to the race stuff. And I got to a point when I was writing this book that there are a lot more questions that were raised. And I think any good academic piece should answer questions, but also should raise new questions. And those aren't necessarily for the authors to answer, right? That might be for someone else to answer. Yeah. So having been doing the beer stuff for now, I mean, going back to my dissertation, basically like 8 years now, I think that I've got like 2 or 3 maybe small little projects that I want to do, like carve out some articles from this. Like I want to do something about malt liquor and hip hop with a colleague of mine who's a hip hop expert and anthropologist at Virginia Tech. He was one of my mentors though, so I was like, man, it would just be cool. I want to publish something with you. He is the one who actually wrote the foreword in the book, Anthony Kwame Harrison.
Okay. And did you go to school with your co-author here?
No, that's my mentor, man. He was my advisor in grad school.
Okay. Wow.
He's the one who hooded me at my dissertation ceremony.
Wow.
Yeah. So he and I have one big last project planned where we would do another edited volume at some point but we probably wouldn't contribute anything original. But I think it's time for me. I mean, I like to be sort of cutting edge and groundbreaking with my research and use more innovative methodologies. So I kind of look at one thing and get what I want out of it, but then it's not like I'm not still interested in beer. Mm-hmm. There's just not much else that I want to get out of it. And I feel like maybe having sort of established this little sub-discipline, sub-field or whatever that I can hand it off now. And if people want to keep going with it, they can. If not, maybe that's all there is, right? Maybe we milked it dry. Maybe the keg is empty, so to speak, you know, but I just, I've gotten to the point where I've answered most of the questions that I have, and I just want to move on. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because I do other stuff about music scenes, and I'm really interested in just online cultures and how like we police those things and stuff like that. So, you know, I want to stay like fresh and hip and cool doing stuff, but like, I don't know, man. This, I don't know. Did you see the comments on this, like on Instagram and Facebook?
No. Tell us.
So I sent this book to, I sent a copy of the book to, he goes by Don't Drink Beers on Instagram and Facebook. His name is Alex Kidd, and he is the #1 social media influencer in the world of beer in the world, right? Like if you've ever traded a beer or you gone online and looked up beers and stuff and gone outside of like your basic consumption criteria, you know who this guy is. I mean, he's 100-something thousand followers across all of his platforms, you know. And, you know, that might seem like a lot when you think somebody like a movie star's got millions, right? But you're talking about craft beer, which is like a pretty niche thing. Yeah. And then within that niche, you're talking about a level of people like this elite, level of people who want to like engage with the culture, you know, like create memes and you know, participate. That's different than like I go to a brewery every once in a while. Like these people are online, like arguing with people over the value of a beer, or this beer is better than that beer because of this, right? Like that's a different level of consumption. You know what I mean? So I sent it to him and I inscribed it, and he just posted a picture of the title page here where I had inscribed it. I had written something here and posted that on his Instagram and just said, it's like, this is not virtue signaling. This is not transmuting wokeness into virtual clout. Like this is, I can't remember what it says, like, this is a difficult conversation, but it's an important one that we need to have. It's like, it's time for us to, you know, change, whatever. And I had been messaging him on Instagram and Facebook, and I was like, you know, look, man, I've been researching craft beer for years. Like, you know, I listened to your podcast, your blog. Like, he's very in tune, but very critical of the scene as well, right? He's very clever with satire. So he gets it on a deeper, or I would say deeper, actually more like heady level, right? And so when he posted it, I mean, I think it was like 2.5, 3 weeks ago or something. And it had 700 or 800 likes and 50, 60 comments. And normally, like, his posts on Instagram will get, you know, at most like 250, 300 likes. I think his biggest post had like 1,500 or 1,600 one time. So I go to bed next day, I wake up, I go play golf, come back, and I check, and I'm like, I'm tagged in this, I'm tagged in that, I'm tagged in this, I comment this, comment that. People are checking, I'm like, what the hell's going on, right? I look, it's like up to like 4,500 likes, 700 something comments. Then another beer blogger who only, like, it's called Worst Beer Blog. He takes screenshots of comment sections on beer blogs to just show like how just shitty people are to each other. You know what I mean? And it's like, here's what people are saying. So then he posted on Facebook, and Alex Kidd posted the same thing on Facebook, and that's when things got kind of crazy. So in that 2-day period, man, a lot of the comments we saw were positive, right? Like, oh, this is so great. Someone's talking about this. Like, thanks for promoting this. I'm pre-ordering the book. And our book sales, the 2 days of this happened, man, and our book is still not even out yet. It's pre-ordered at this point, right? We sold 263 copies in that 2-day period because of that one post.
Wow, yeah.
And now we're not doing it for money, but it just shows you the power of like social media and the influence there, right? You know what I mean? By the way, I will say we are actually like donating a percentage once. We won't get our check probably for a year or so, and it won't be much, maybe $100. But either way, we've already put aside like a percentage to go to, you know, something that's involved with Black Lives Matter or increasing diversity in the brewing industry in some way, right? So we definitely wanted to highlight that kind of stuff. But the rest of the comments, man, are kind of in two sort of different buckets, if you will. One is the sort of traditional, traditional not the right word, typical, and certainly inexcusable and unsurprising colorblind sort of response. Oh, well, beer's not racist. You know, there's dark beers and light beers, ha ha ha, right? Okay, yeah, whatever. But to say that, like, you know, the comments like, black people just don't like beer, why is that a problem? Or who cares? Black people can go learn how to brew if they want, they can get that job, right? So to say like I don't see color, that colorblind racist ideology is negating or discounting or dismissing rather the structural inequalities and privileges that are in society, right? Through hundreds of years of systemic racism, right? So that's problematic. But those people you can at least kind of like have a conversation with and say like, well, actually, you know, man, it's not really like that, right? And so we made it a point, you know, to have as many voices of color as possible in the book at all aspects of production, consumption, writing, journalists. I mean, we had the diversity ambassador from the Brewers Association. I mean, so we were trying to be, you know, as representative of a voice as possible, right? So the other little section of comments is when it got really bad, man. That's when the 4chan stuff.
The Confederacy came out.
Worse than that. I mean, it was worse than the It was, you know, 4chan people. Like, I mean, we got, they're empty, but they're, you know, death threats, you know, like in the chats, you know, people like, oh, come decapitate the authors, or like, you know, it turns into this like cancel culture thing, like if beer's racist, whatever. But not to go down that rabbit hole. But one thing that I would say about the title of the book is we changed it intentionally. I mean, this was right before George Floyd, and then maybe it was just serendipity that it happened. But, you know, people see the title, Beer and Racism, How Beer Became White, Why It Matters, and Movements to Change It. And so they fixate on the beer and racist, right? And they're like, how can beer be racist? And like, that's actually not what we're arguing. We're saying beer and racism, as in beer is entwined with, beer is reflective of, beer is a manifestation of, you know, these things. So beer itself is not racist, but the beer industry is, just like any other.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah.
So it's a lot of tough, you know, like you gotta, you know, my co-author, man, he got memed really hard, like, because he had to have his profile public and everything, and took a just a terrible selfie. I told him it was bad when he took it, of him holding the book, and those 4chan people got on it and just memed the hell out of him, man, and he really took it hard, you know, and I'm like, look, if we're writing about something like this and we're not pissing people off,
exactly,
we
man.
didn't do it right.
It's you know, I struggle with, like, I put out a lot of content with the podcast and the gym, YouTube, and occasionally they'll get a few thousand views on the video, particularly with my gym videos. I got a little more momentum with the gym videos, but it's weird because people will, like, on Instagram, somebody shared something endorsing this move, but then we're also talking shit. They were also talking shit about it.
About technique or something.
Yeah, they're like, this is a cool move. I wouldn't suggest it, but
yeah.
And I'm like, why'd you share it on your page, dude?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's people ask me frequently, they're like, how do you deal with that? Because there's always comments. If I looked, there would be comments almost every day.
Yeah.
But there was one, I had this, the Black Lives Matter organizer from the Clarksville rally, which I went to. And that one blew up. It got 2,000 views on Facebook or something like that. But just the comments, and when people would share it, the comments and their share would blow up super negative. And I was just like, "Oh yeah, you guys enjoy."
So,
I didn't even read any of them.
Dude, so speaking of that, maybe I'll end it with this. We're drinking this beer right now called Black is Beautiful from Parrish, the same brewery.
It's tasty, dude.
Yeah, it's a salted caramel imperial stout. So this Black is Beautiful beer brew campaign was a lot of breweries. I don't know how many. I think it's close to 50 or 60 breweries all did a similar style beer, and all the funding and money is going, and they feature black artists, and all the money is going to Black Lives Matter and sort of adjacent, you know, things. But man, I lost my train of thought. What'd you say, man?
We were the Black Lives Matter organizer from Clarksville. People hating on blowing up the comments.
So then, man, sorry, this is gonna be really good on the podcast. We are drinking beer though. So for the record, 10% alcohol there. But man, so it started on the Instagram, then it made its way to Facebook. But then my co-author had signed up for Google Alerts, so anytime anybody mentions the book, he gets a notice.
Yeah.
Man, this thing showed up on a Glock forum, an AR-15 forum, a conservative, like, white supremacist news forum.
Proud Boys.
It wasn't Proud Boys, but Reddit. This was, man, like, I can't remember it wasn't the Daily Caller or the Daily Storm, but it was something to that effect, right? Like Liberty News Network or some crap like that, you know? And, you know, you're like, that's also interesting sociologically, because you're like, well, here we had a post about beer. And then I think really makes the case for the book even more is because, well, how many of those people then took it about, like, now it's just about liberal professors, and they made some really funny
Are
comments.
you brainwashing people with your liberal
indoctrination
ideology?
is the word I prefer, but yeah. No, it was funny how many people made comments about sociologists in particular. It's like, really cool. I didn't know we had that reputation of being, But yeah, man, to see it like go to that, where it eventually didn't become about us challenging the beer industry. Then it became about somebody else is challenging whiteness, somebody else is challenging masculinity, somebody else is you know what I'm saying? So that's like, to end up on an AR-15 forum or a Glock forum about a book about beer. How's that happen, man? So
Well, where can we get the beer, Nate? The book, rather.
we can get the beer in nowhere because we live in a dry county, but the book is on Amazon at the moment.
Pre-order?
Yeah, it's you can pre-order it on Amazon. It'll be available on October 14th. Paperback. I wouldn't recommend the hardback. That's a library copy. It's way expensive, but I want to say it's like $25. It's not bad for an academic book, and there are ebooks available too.
You're going to do, is it going to be on Audible or anything?
I'm not sure which format they're using, if it's Kindle or Audible, but there is an e-reader format.
Great. I haven't played with Kindle much, but I need to start, man. I've done something like 75 audiobooks on Audible this year. So it's a game changer for me. I've been off track because I just did this 48 lecture Egyptology series by this Egyptologist I really admire named Bob Breyer. I'm trying to get him on the podcast, but
That'd be dope.
But I was like, I found these on YouTube. Some channel put them up, Lost in History. And it's 48 lectures, and I was like, my mind was blown.
Oh, yeah, man.
All right, and I was just teaching about Egypt and Civ, so I cranked them out in like 2 weeks.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, it was good.
Nice,
Yeah.
man.
Well, Nate, thanks for coming back on. Yeah, guests listening can go. You were on with your band, Black Sabbatical, previously.
We were.
And
Repeat offenders.
Yeah, man, it's great to sit down and talk with you. I was looking forward to hearing about this, and thanks
Cool,
for the
man.
copy.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Brian.
Right
Appreciate
on,
it,
bro.
brother.
Take it easy.